Hello everybody, welcome to this training module for MOP 311.04 Media Interaction Procedures. This is Jason Evans and I'm the Public Information Officer for your Dallas Fire Rescue Department. As some of you may know, the department has been the topic of a number of communications regarding our alleged interference with the media and general public while they're taking pictures or video at the scenes of emergency incidents. Since this is not the first time this has happened, an ERD titled Public Right to Photography was posted on the IDS in response to the most recent email we received. But while IDS postings can be effective and have proved to be effective in the past, the truth of the matter is that they can get pushed into the archives in no time, depending on what else has been posted after it. And at that point, it becomes out of sight, out of mind. As a result, it was decided that a training module to reinforce what's written in the MOP may serve as the most effective way to help reverse the trend. That being the case, some of the things we want to accomplish in today's training are as follows. For background, we'll consider why civilians as well as the media are interested in recording first responders in the first place, as well as the relative role that plays in social media. We'll touch on how important it is to understand that the media and the general public have a constitutional First Amendment right to record first responders. However, on the flip side, we'll also discuss the limitations to that right. We'll also discuss the appropriate way to prevent disclosure of protected health information, and how the most appropriate response to being recorded in most cases can be no response at all. Please take a moment to review the A and B subsections of the MOP. Afterwards, we're going to take a moment to discuss both of them. Now, let's take a moment to think about any situation where you've been recorded while performing your official duties. First, ask yourself, how did you react? Did being recorded make you feel uncomfortable, irritated, or annoyed? Or did it even make you feel like the person recording you was trying to catch you doing something improper or unethical? Did you just ignore it? Or did you take any action to intervene in the activity? Consider, how did the situation get resolved? And in hindsight, was there anything that could have been done differently? And more often than not, the answer to that question is going to be yes. And what we found is that a lot of the times the cause for these inappropriate reactions is the lack of training, which is the reason that we're doing this actual module. In the past, our members have kind of been left to fend for themselves, and when they're encountered with someone who's recording them, they've kind of been left on their own to come up with the most appropriate reaction, and a lot of times the reaction is not appropriate. When it all comes down to it, guys, the most important thing to understand is that the media or the public, they're not there to catch you doing anything wrong. They're there to document a significant or interesting incident at which you just happen to be there doing your job. The worst thing you can do is take focus off of what you're supposed to be there for and start asking questions as to why you're being recorded. That kind of action sometimes can make you become the story, and you certainly don't want to do that, because the last thing you want to have happen is an insignificant incident that would have just got wiped off the map to turn into front page or lead off news regarding how you reacted to the media. Now, just take a moment to review section C of the MOP, and we will discuss it here in a second. Basically, what this section is talking about is the public's, and media's for that matter, First Amendment right to record the incidents we respond to. Keep in mind, guys, that it's like we said before, these are events that they are recording, and we just happen to be part of the event. And it's really no different than whether you're on the job or off the job, or on the job when you take a picture at a fire or you take a video at a fire, or if you just happen to be off duty and you pass an accident and say you want to snap a shot or take a video. That same right you have to take that action is the same right that the media and the general public have to record the incident to which your actions are a part of. Another thing that's important to understand as well is that the right extends to these individuals' freedom to publish this information on a medium of their choosing. And obviously, in this day and age, we're talking about social media, we're talking about Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, even YouTube or other platforms. Just long story short, in effect, the general public has the same right as the local media to record us. They can do it at any time, and they can put it on any medium that they want to. However, make no mistake that like any right, any constitutional right, freedoms are not absolute, and they are governed by reasonable logistical and safety restrictions. All right, now take a moment to review subsection D of the MOP, and we'll discuss that as well in a moment. Now that section was basically to help you understand what the limitations that the general public and the media have when they're recording incidents that we respond to. However, first it's important to understand exactly where they can be when they are recording us. And to do that, we have to identify what a public space is, which is basically a location that the person doing the recording has a legal right to be at. They can include the street, community parks, malls, public buildings, and even government buildings. Buildings like City Hall, they have spaces that are publicly accessible. And just like any other place, if the public has the right to be there, then they have the right to record what's going on there as well. But we go back to what we've been saying up to this point. You as a first responder should always be focused on the reason that you were called to the incident. And despite the fact that this is a public space and that there are certain limitations that they have to recording you, you let those limitations identify themselves and don't worry yourself with anything but what you've been called there for. Generally speaking, we don't want the media or the general public to basically place themselves or anybody else at the scene in any kind of danger. If it so applies that we have an incident scene that's been marked or taped off, we don't want them wandering within that boundary. We certainly don't want them trespassing on private property. Overall, we don't want them interfering with fire or EMS activity, compromising our ability to do the job that we've been called to do at an emergency scene. If it is the case that you are being interfered with, if you feel like your ability to do your job is being compromised by a crowd, simply call on the assistance of law enforcement. This is a practice that we've always done, and it's not adding any extra responsibility onto law enforcement. In fact, in most cases, that's what they're there for in the first place. Now take a moment to look over subsection E of the MOP, and we will discuss this one shortly as well. Now, the purpose of that slide was to basically tell you that HIPAA has no place in the public's right to photograph or video the incidents we respond to. If it becomes the case that you feel an obligation to protect the patient, if you feel there's going to be incidental disclosure of protected health information, or even if that person is just wishing for some sense of privacy or even dignity, depending upon the circumstances, you can accomplish that by simply moving the patient into a private area, a home, privately owned building, or even into the back of the rescue unit. And at that point, that gets rid of the possibility that anyone's going to photograph or take video of this person. The one thing we don't want to get into is intentionally blocking someone with a camera. That is not a suitable response. And trust me, this is not something that we want to get into. But just based on my job responsibility and my experience, I'm aware of a local freelance photographer who is actually in the process of pursuing significant litigation against a public service agency for the violation of this very right. And trust me, this is not something that you want to have to deal with. Now, listen, guys, if it hadn't already happened to you, it's probably going to happen to you down the road. But it's an all too common occurrence when someone who's recording, whether it's for legitimate or informational purposes, will engage you in conversation just to record your reaction. Of course, this is more common with law enforcement, but it can also apply to fire and EMS personnel as well. A response and this kind of engagement can prove to be counterproductive and more often than not completely unnecessary, and sometimes it can even escalate tempers and result in pretty much a negative outcome. We could go round and round about different disengagement techniques, and I could probably point you in the direction of training modules that would teach you how to develop these disengagement techniques, or even maybe have programmed responses. But we go right back to what we've been saying all along, that the most effective and most absolute disengagement technique is basically to conduct yourself as if no one else was there except for you and the patient or patients that you've been called to respond to. So let's do a quick review of everything that we've talked about. First, we want to recognize that the public has a First Amendment right to photograph and video us at the emergency scenes that we respond to, so long as they are in a public place. We also want to remember that the right to record is not absolute. It's like we just said, they have to do it in a public place and where they have a legal right to be present, and they cannot interfere with emergency operations. I feel like I have to go back and reiterate the fact that simply recording, having someone turn on a recording device, does not constitute interference. And a lot of times that's one of the mistakes that's made, because someone just doesn't like the general idea of being recorded because they think that someone is there to catch them doing something wrong, when in fact the people are only there because it is an interesting or significant incident at which we just happen to be present doing our jobs. Also, if it's warranted, when it's warranted, to protect the incidental disclosure of PHI, remember that it does not apply to video and photography, but that if you want to preserve a patient's sense of privacy, sense of dignity, if you will, you can do so by simply moving them into a private residence, private location, or even in the back of your ambulance. And I can't overemphasize this last point, to conduct yourself as if no one is there, so that you do not become the story. Said this in one of the previous slides, the last thing you want to do is turn a relatively insignificant incident into a front page or opening news regarding your inappropriate reaction to simply being recorded. Well, that about wraps it up, guys. Thank you all for your time and attention. I know you'd probably rather be doing other things than listening to a training module, but I do appreciate your time. If you have any questions about this module, about other media interaction or media relations matters, or just the Public Information Office in general, as a reminder, I am Jason Evans. I'm your Public Information Officer, and you can reach out to me at any of the contacts listed on the slide. Thanks again, guys, and you guys be safe out there. Bye.